Today on the 01581 Let's Talk, a conversation about affordable housing in Westboro and the work of the Affordable Housing Trust. Hi, and welcome to this episode of the 01581 Let's Talk. I'm the host of this show. I'm Shelby Marshall, also serving as a member of the Select Board here in Westboro. I'm joined by two amazing guests, a fellow Select Board member, Alan Edinburgh, and my friend and resident for many years, chair of the Westboro Affordable Housing Trust, Ed Bain. Alan, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, for coming
having
on.
us.
Yeah, so today on the show, we're going to cover a number of different kind of topics related to affordable housing. Quick background, if you will, on the Affordable Housing Trust, kind of the mission. Then we'll get into kind of work to date. And most importantly, why are we doing this work? And Ed is the man of all things statistics. And so you'll paint a real picture of what's going on here in Westboro. Again, the amazing work that you guys are doing. So, Alan, let's start it off with you. Kind of a little background on the Affordable Housing Trust. Why does it exist, and what's the mission?
Sure. So the Westboro Affordable Housing Trust, as the name implies, is a housing trust for affordable housing, which basically means we're a real estate investment trust. And unlike a private trust, we are a government entity that is an agent of the town of Westboro. So we're part of the town, but we can operate somewhat autonomously, which allows us to move quickly when market opportunities arrive. The big difference being, if the trust wants to acquire a property, we don't need to call a town meeting to do it. We have the authority to do it, and our declaration of trust gives our select board oversight at a high level of the finances to make sure everything is going well and being done appropriately. Our mission is to create, preserve, and advocate for affordable housing. That's both low-cost, low-income housing as well as moderate-income housing to the benefit of Westboro residents and the community.
Okay, excellent. Excellent, thank you. When we think about Westboro, I think, whether you get your news from WBZ or you get it from the Community Advocate or maybe Facebook, affordability is a topic that is, it's a common topic, right? So, and I think we saw certainly a spike, or I think there's been a general sensitivity in Westboro to like affordability of housing since COVID has even accelerated, or maybe our awareness of it. But Ed, give us a picture. Like, tell us some statistics here as it relates to affordability in Westboro, or lack thereof.
Right. You're absolutely right. I think we see this, the housing, affordable housing at, or any even reasonable housing cost throughout the country, and particularly here in Metro West and Westboro, has just spiked. And it is very, very difficult for people of more limited means to find housing, whether it's rental or owner-based, even smaller homes, et cetera.
Sure.
We've seen it, the value of our homes just skyrocket.
Right.
The interest rates have sort of created, although they've gone down just in the past week, they have sort of locked in people who don't want to move,
right.
And that has created an imbalance in the inventory, the demand and supply, if you will.
Sure.
Some interesting statistics are, one of the things that the Department of Housing and Urban Development does is they have a basic stat, or a basic, if you will, benchmark, where they believe that individuals or families, households, should not have to pay more than 30% of their income, their household income, on housing. And that includes both their rent. If they own a home, it would be their mortgage, utilities, taxes, property taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what they consider a reasonable percentage.
Okay.
What they also say is, well, if you start to exceed that 30%, if it becomes larger than 30%, you become house burdened, meaning you're burdened by the amount of money that you have to spend on housing in lieu of other things that you
Sure.
might need, you know,
Right.
such as saving for retirement, et
Sure.
cetera.
Food.
Food,
medication,
medication,
yeah,
yes.
everything.
medication.
Yep.
It cuts across the board. You know, people have to find that money somewhere
Sure.
because having a roof over your house is
Is-
one of
is
pretty
primary.
Pretty
Right.
primary.
Right, right.
And actually, you know, one statistic, we recently did what they call a housing production plan,
Mm.
okay, which really looks over the whole town. But just picking out from that,
And that was in collaboration with,
with the
pla-
planning
With the
board,
planning board.
yeah,
Planning
we
board and
both
planning
put money in.
department.
Yep, okay.
And, you know, just reading one statistics, you know, in Westboro, approximately 19% of owner-occupied households, now that would be both condos as well as single residential,
Sure.
and we're about half single residential, about 19% are spending more than 30% of their household income on, you know, their housing costs. When it comes to renters, it gets really worse because 38%, over a third of
Call it
renters,
40% for
or almost
for just-
40%, 40%
Yeah.
are spending more than 30% of their household income. And in some cases, that goes up to into the 40s or low 50%. So it puts a tremendous strain on those individuals.
Yeah, yeah. So, not asking you to do that here, but does that study further break down into by any other demographics like age?
We don't have it by age, but we would know, obviously, lower income people are going to suffer more because the rents are the same regardless of your income
Sure,
in general.
sure.
But we don't have it broken down by age per se.
Sure.
We do know that one of the components of housing costs is taxes, and particularly in more elderly or senior
Yeah.
individuals, they may live in their house, they may own the house, but as their taxes increase, but their income stays relatively flat,
Right.
that puts more of a burden on them. So
Right,
their
right.
housing costs are increasing towards that 30%, if not over it.
Right.
And we do know from the townwide senior needs assessment
Right.
Yeah.
that there's a need for more downsize opportunities
Right.
for seniors who want to age within, you know, who can live independently, want to age within the community,
Yep.
where they can go from the single-family home where they raise their
Sure.
family to a condo or a smaller home or to an apartment. And we don't have enough of that housing stock at this time.
Right, and ideally, that's not just from an overall size, right? I don't need a 4-bedroom home anymore because my kids are gone and so on
Right.
and so forth. But there also is very much an affordability component that drives that decision-making or want. Okay, so some other statistics that we often talk about, the SHI,
Right.
we love acronyms, right, when it comes to anything governmental. How is that relevant? Why does it matter?
Let me explain a little bit about SHI and how and where we stand in Westboro. SHI stands for Subsidized Housing Inventory, and that's a standard term across housing in general, especially affordable housing.
Okay.
And the state, to step back for a second, the state wants every community to have at least 10% of their housing stock, be it individual homes, residential homes, condos, rents, et cetera, 10% of those units to be considered affordable, meaning
Okay.
that the cost
So it
to
meets
live
this
in them
criteria.
is 30% or less.
Yep.
Okay. The way SHI works is they basically just take the percentage. To calculate that percentage, they just take what are the total number of housing units
Okay.
in the town, and then how many of those are affordable.
Okay.
Okay, and that becomes your SHI metric. Now, right now, by the state's calculation, our SHI percentage is 11.74.
Okay.
So that's good. That's better than many towns.
Sure, sure.
In the state as well as in Metro West here. However, there's a certain unique, if you will, rule or metric that they use where normally by law in Westboro, if you build something new, 20% of the units have to be
Right.
affordable.
So as an example,
Colangelo, we've been looking at the
On Lyman
Westboro
Street.
Shopping Center.
Right,
Okay,
right.
They have 132 units that they have proposed.
Right.
Okay, and it has been permitted.
yep,
By law, they have to make 20% of those units affordable.
right,
However, the state wants to encourage even more affordable units. And what they do, one of the carrots they have is if you can go from 20% to 25%, not only do you get benefit of the 20% in your SHI calculation,
Yep.
you get all the units in that development. In their case, it's 132 units
Sure.
are added into your what's considered your subsidized housing inventory, even though only a quarter are there. So
so it's a little bit artificially
Right.
inflated
It-
when
But you also, right, you
it
also,
is.
you
Yeah.
also have homes that were made affordable under programs that no longer exist.
okay,
And most often when because those programs have expired, when those homes come up for resale, if they can't find an eligible buyer,
Sure.
they convert to market rate.
yep,
And so you lose an affordable home, but it stays on the SHI list forever because they don't want to penalize towns
oh, interesting,
for that.
okay,
So
okay.
you end up with fewer actual affordable units
Gotcha.
than the SHI number would say
I
you
got
have.
you, I got you.
And because of this, I'll use the word inflationary factor,
Sure.
be that as it may. It's good for us because it protects us from having developers come in and do what we call a hostile 40B, which means they can say zoning, some of the zoning requirements, setbacks, other aspects of building sort of go out the window a little bit.
Sure,
You know, we lose
sure.
control of that. What I've done is actually counted up the number of affordable units.
Sure.
Actually, that where they're truly affordable.
I think I saw you walking around with a pen and clipboard. No, I'm
I
kidding.
know. No, we got it all. I mean, we have the stats.
Yeah.
You know, and when you look at the actual number of affordable units in Westboro, right now it's 5.8% versus that 11.7%
Interesting.
that I mentioned.
Interesting.
That the state
It's a huge
considers.
difference, right.
So some people say, "Oh, we're at 11%.
Yep.
We're good to go." Well, yeah, from the state perspective, but in reality,
Right.
there is still a tremendous need
Sure, sure.
for affordable units.
Okay, so as we kind of pivot the conversation to the work of the trust to address kind of what we've been talking about here, none of this happens. The work of the trust doesn't happen. The ability to initiate different programs without some funding. So, at a high level, where does the funding from the trust come from?
Okay.
I'll let Alan take
Put it briefly, the funding comes from the generosity of the people and the residents of the town of Westboro when they vote at town meeting to transfer funds
Okay.
to the trust. And those come from a number of sources. The planning board will collect mitigation dollars in exchange for various things when they're issuing special permits. And some of those mitigation dollars are geared towards or earmarked for affordable housing.
Okay.
So those have been and continue to be transferred to the trust. There's a warrant article for fall town meeting.
And just to be clear, all of that happens through town meeting, the vehicle for
Yes.
so it has to be initiated at a committee or board level, but then the movement
Right.
into the trust requires a vote of the
Yes.
public body.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we're fortunate just because of the way the Del Webb Chauncey Lake project worked out. There was a negotiation with Pulte, a $9 million settlement.
Mm-hmm.
That money's earmarked through the ZBA for affordable housing and projects for seniors.
Right.
So the town's been generous enough to transfer the initial 3 payments that Pulte made so far,
Sure.
$1.8 million to the trust. There's more in that fund. Should the trust seek more of those funds, we'd come before town meeting and make our case.
Right.
We've also pursued outside grants, and we'll continue to do that. And now that we have passed the CPA, and there's a community preservation committee, when we have a project or an initiative, we can approach that committee, who will recommend
Right.
to town meeting
Right.
to provide the funds.
And just
so
for
again,
clarif-
it's
yeah,
it's
sorry.
a town meeting vote that happens.
Right. And on the Community Preservation Act, just for clarification, the three-legged stool of that whole, of passing it in the process and allocations of funds is affordable housing or community housing, as they
Right.
call it, open space and recreation, and historical preservation.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
so the funds they can't be used for anything else. They have to be allocated at a minimum 10% of each annual the contributions from taxpayers have to go to those three, and then the other 70% can be determined by the Community Preservation Committee. All of it, though, even to be spent, even though it goes into those buckets, has to be voted on at town meeting.
The actual transfer goes
so-
to town meeting.
So I know and have the privilege of learning from you, Alan, on a regular basis, all the work. You provide regular updates to the Select Board of all the work that the Affordable Housing Trust is doing. Ed, your chair, whoever wants to take this question, you guys have been super busy since your inception in...
Fall of 2020 was when the town meeting voted to create the
Okay.
trust.
Right.
So what have you done? What are you working on? What are you looking ahead to?
Well, there's a couple of things we've done. Alan,
Yeah.
why
So
don't you take the
the
first
timing
couple?
of creation of the trust just happened to coincide with COVID.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which presented some unique challenges. And so the trust made a decision. It's a little, at the time it was a little off mission because we were looking at an immediate need.
Sure.
But we initiated a COVID-19 emergency rental assistance program because renters who were in trouble, there was additional funding from the state
Right.
to keep them, to prevent evictions, but it was taking 60 to 90 days to get the paperwork through, and people were being kicked out before the money came.
Right.
And so we launched a program to bridge that gap and provide that emergency assistance. We partnered with Metro West Collaborative Development, a nonprofit that specializes in affordable housing issues, to administer the program, and we were able to prevent 17 households from being evicted.
Wow.
Over, I think, 57 people in total, 39 of them children. And so we got them over that hump until the state assistance could come in or other financial arrangements could be made for long-term housing security. Additionally, as Ed mentioned briefly, the trust and the Colangelo developers for the Lyman Street project, the old Staples conversion to
Yes, thank you.
apartments, the trust provided a subsidy to that project where they are increasing the number of affordable units from 20% to 25% of the 132, which increases the affordable housing stock of actual affordable units, but it also provides us additional protection when it comes
because
to
of
that
that
10%
total
threshold.
calculation.
And because when we look at that 10% threshold, there are apartments in Westboro whose affordability restrictions come off in 2036.
Sure.
So we're looking at what's it going to look like in 2040 and 2050, so that we don't run into trouble in the future.
And so I think, just a quick pause here, I think one of the important things that I've learned, and certainly through the work as you guys are doing this, is that as affordable units are coming on, let's use the Colangelo property, those are being deeded as, the 25%, correct me if I'm wrong, is being deeded as in perpetuity.
Yes.
So this is a practice that Westboro wasn't, I'll say, consistent about in the past. And so since the trust has come on board, any opportunity that where a unit is coming up and maybe exceeding its term of affordability, obviously you guys are working to kind of provide incentives. I know you're going to
Yes.
talk about that, but anything new, it's like we want to put that stamp on it to maintain that.
And
right?
we've reached a similar agreement with the developers who are converting the Sonesta Extended Stay 25 Connector Road to
Right.
apartments.
Right.
They are also increasing their affordability component from 20 to 25% in perpetuity.
Excellent.
And that's 109 units.
Yeah. So
now.
this way we're not kind of, and that's so important. Hopefully viewers understand that. So we're not chasing our tail here, right? We're not like
Right.
kind of working and then something's coming out the back door, like there's a leak in the faucet, so to speak.
Right.
So yeah. Okay. So so the Lyman project, you just mentioned the Sonesta. What about preservation of existing units?
Yeah, what we will come up with, there was one case where there was what's called an affordable unit, but they were under, it was a house, individual family house, 3-bedroom house, where they had been under a program that had been initiated back a number of years ago, probably 20 plus years.
1970.
1970.
Okay. All right.
Okay. And it basically provided that the homeowner got the benefit of some of the significant increase in the value of housing. So the price that they could sell the house at and was much higher than normal increases based upon income.
Yep.
Okay, which is the basic model. It's
For affordability.
for affordability.
Yep.
It's income based. So what we did is we did the calculations. We worked with the office, the Executive Office of Housing and
HELOC, right?
yeah,
It's-
HELOC, and livable communities.
Yep.
And came up with some subsidies to bring down what they could sell it for, so that it was sold at an affordable price. And I think it came out to be about $231,000 to the new buyers.
So
The price of that
in
home.
in that example,
Yeah.
did the seller lose benefit? They
No.
maintained. You were
No.
just filling that void.
The seller sold the property for what they're allowed to sell the property for under the program.
Right.
And the trust made up the gap between that and market rate.
Gotcha.
So that if we hadn't done that, that house would have been one that converted to a market rate unit.
Sure.
And then would never have been an affordable unit again, but would have stayed on our that SHI list
Right.
forever.
Just kind of the
Right.
yeah.
And
the-
so it was an
the paper
affordable
version.
way to, and the amount of the subsidy we provided is significantly less.
Yeah.
It's about a third the cost of building a new unit.
Wow.
And so it was an affordable way to maintain that affordability.
Yep.
And that house went to an eligible buyer
Sure.
who's going to raise their family in it and,
Sure.
and have a good start.
That's great.
And there's going to be, well, it's in perpetuity, but it's going to be now the increase in the sale price will be at affordable
Got it.
Yeah.
unit
Because of
levels.
We
in
reset the
program. mechanism.
We
Into the current
reset
programs.
to the current
Right.
model, if you
Right.
will.
I think what I recall about that particular project and what I think is so important about the work of the trust, I mean, in addition to all that you're doing, is that you guys have really become a resource, a known, credible resource to those who own a property or are renting and they have questions, because it is a myriad of acronyms and programs. And so I think that's, I want to make sure viewers understand that if they have questions about affordability in Westboro, that you guys are an active resource for them.
Yes, we are.
Even like the terrible, like I received an eviction notice, right? To I have some questions. There's this affordability thing I don't understand, and we might want to sell someday, right? So kind of a range of as well as how do I get involved, right?
Right.
So,
Just on that point,
Yeah.
one thing that I didn't mention earlier, but I think it's very important, is
Yeah.
another statistic. And there's a quasi-government organization called Mass Housing that assists in a variety of ways, loans and other programs on affordable housing. And they did a study, an analysis on rental eviction filings. In other words, the landlord files with
Okay.
the court
Okay.
that they intend to evict somebody. It's almost primarily because of lack of payment of rent. Ending earlier this year, for a 6-month period ending this past spring or so, they did it for all the towns of any size, like over 200 towns
Okay.
within the Commonwealth, of the eviction rate per 1,000
Sure.
units. So at Westboro, for every 1,000 units of housing, the rate was 29.4%. In other words, 29 out of those 1,000, there had been a file just in that 6-month period. That equated to a total of 77 eviction filings
wow.
within the town across the various rental apartments. That ranked Westboro in the state, in the Commonwealth, number 9 highest eviction filing rate,
Wow. Well, and when you
which indicates obviously the demand. I mean, people aren't able to
well,
afford
there's a
it.
demand, but also with the earlier statistic, correct me if I'm wrong here, in terms of the affordability element
Right.
and kind of the house burden,
Yeah,
house
yeah.
poor, right? That rental rate is although we have a lot of rentals, right, in Westboro.
we
You
do.
guys have talked about that in terms of a percentage of whole, and as we compared to other towns or cities even. But the affordability component sort of, to me, ties into that eviction component as
absolutely.
well.
It's a reflection
Absolutely.
of
Reflection, yeah.
the burden.
Wow. Wow.
But
do you
other
have,
things
do you have a
that-
sense of then, of those 77, how many were actually, I'll say, fulfilled or carried forward?
We don't know. I think it was less than that, because usually that's the first step that landlords go through.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, the tenants will either find someplace else so
Sure.
that they don't get evicted,
Evicted.
which can affect
Their
their
credit
Or
and everything else, right?
You need that notice of potential eviction
Yeah.
in order to
Oh.
start qualifying for some of the state emergency programs.
Right.
And so we know that Julia O'Neill Welch, our outreach coordinator with Westboro Youth and Family Services, it helps families and households do that incredibly complex
Sure.
application process.
Sure.
The level of documentation required for a renter looking for that rental assistance compares with applying for a mortgage. It's extremely burdensome. And once you start the application, there's actually a time limit to get all
Yeah.
your information in.
Yeah.
And so she's doing casework
Yeah.
with families, helping them apply.
Sure.
So that's a way that evictions can be mitigated.
Do you have a sense from your work, kind of liaisoning with the various state agencies, that's as affordability becomes top of mind for the governor and the legislature, and we've seen some of the laws changing around that, that's such an antiquated process, right? I've got to receive an eviction notice before I can even begin to look for some sort of help and subsidy. Do you have a sense that any of those tides are turning?
Slowly.
Very slow.
Slowly. I mean, the reality is, at the state level, the rules about affordable housing and affordable home ownership and the programs, Chapter 40B and the laws haven't had a serious review and update since the early 1970s.
Sure.
And the economy and the communities have shifted,
Yep.
but the programs are still bound by this overriding
Yep.
legislation that has not yet been modernized, and until recently, even discussing changes
right.
is a third rail of politics,
Right,
right? There's
right.
no win.
Yeah.
It's like healthcare. There's
Yeah.
no easy solution.
Yeah. So, that kind of is, in our remaining time here, I want to make sure you guys get to cover anything else you want to talk about. Current work you're doing, other levels of advocacy. The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I think I just want to mention, you talked about the state. One of the really important legislative actions towards affordable housing was the recent Affordable Homes Act that was just passed in the last legislative session. And that was a bond bill to raise $5.1 million. Originally, it was $4 billion. I'm sorry,
Billion,
$5.1 billion.
Yep.
Originally, it had been proposed at $4 billion, but so many legislators around the state,
Sure.
approached not only the governor, but the legislature itself, saying we need more.
We need
this
more,
is such a crisis. So it indicated, first of all, and the good news is the support,
Yep.
and the recognition of the problem,
Sure.
state wide. So there will be more funds available in different categories coming out of that. A lot of it being rehab of existing properties, be they state-owned
Sure.
or privately owned
Yep.
or in need of that.
And, and it's important to know that fight for that funds
Yeah.
is just beginning, because that bill authorizes the state to issue the bonds.
Right.
But then the legislature actually has to say, given the amount of money we can
Right.
bond each year,
Right. We have
how
to
much are we
approve.
actually going to do for this?
Right.
So it's a maximum of $5.1 billion, but the money doesn't actually exist
Right.
until the bonds are issued and allocated, and then
Right.
there'll be some program definition that'll let us apply.
Sure. Okay. Okay. All right.
I think other things, one of the things that we did was passed through town meeting was that there had been at one point what was called the Housing Partnership Committee. Okay,
yep.
and their role had primarily, or the mandate had been to assist developers coming into town.
Sure.
That wanted to do or needed to do affordable housing,
Yep.
and would assist them.
Yep.
okay, in that process. So they were really outward facing, if
Yep.
you will, towards the development community. The trust originally looked and imagined itself more inner looking. Like, we will support development either directly or indirectly,
Sure.
but we would initiate it.
Yep. Yep.
The Housing Partnership Committee had really been defunct for a number of years.
Yep, yep.
So we were winding up taking on that job. Like, for example, in Colangelo,
Right.
they were coming to us, asking us about programs and
Sure,
other things.
sure.
So we finally said, why don't we just combine? We have 7 great members on the trust.
yeah.
We will take over that sort of outward-looking
Yep.
view. And
Sure.
so we've worked with a number of developers, converters, what have
Yep.
you. To do that,
Yeah.
and it's
Well, it makes
proved
sense.
yeah, we have the expertise, we know the programs,
Yeah.
and we have a good strong bench on the
Well,
trust.
sort of like we want to do with economic development, right? We not only want to service within the community, right?
Right.
Keeping people here, so on and
Right.
so forth, businesses, but we want to be outside looking. Who wants to come to Westboro? What programs could we use to attract? So, I put those on parallel, but obviously very different tracks. There are a couple actual projects, actual brick and mortar projects you guys are working on.
You want to give a brief update on
Yep.
those?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Oh, me.
I can, but go ahead.
One is there was one of our first projects was there was a house that had been taken by the town over on Baylor Avenue. It had
By
been
tax taking,
by
just to be
tax
clear.
taking,
Yep,
yes,
yep,
and it was just it was very, very bad shape.
Yep.
And we basically just purchased it for the cost of, which was $48,000, which was the back taxes.
Yep.
So we kept the town whole that way. And we're just now finally through
Yeah.
negotiations, RFPs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
They are in the process of demoing that house to build a three-bedroom
Yep, so-
cottage-style house or small house to fit within that community
Yep, yep.
over there
That's
on Baylor
great.
by the Lake Chauncey. So that's
Again,
hopefully they'll
affordable
one of
unit,
it'll be
perpetuity,
all in
wonderful,
perpetuity,
wonderful.
and a brand new home that replaces. I'll use the word blighted property.
Yeah, right. So good for the neighborhood and
Good for the
again,
neighborhood, good for the town, good for people.
Wonderful.
Want to talk about the 2 other
Sure.
properties?
So the trust, one property we acquired on transfer from the town
Yep.
on High Street Extension. Another property we bought out of a bankruptcy auction on Beach Street. We're combining those 2 properties. We're calling them, for lack of a better name, the HB Cottages.
Okay.
Between the 2 properties, it'll be one project, 10 or potentially 11 small single-family cottage-style homes. The intent right now is for ownership, sort of again looking at the data from the housing production plan
Sure.
and providing some of those ownership downsizing opportunities as well. Currently, we are doing pre-permitting work. There's issues with utilities
Yep.
and water sewer, as we
Yep.
all know, wastewater capacity,
Yep.
conservation on one of the properties, and we're going to basically get pre-permitting buy-in from different boards and committees involved, so we can put that buy-in in the RFP, reduce the risk
Right.
for the bidders.
Yeah.
Then we put it out to bid for redevelopment. And
So important.
our
and
goal is to get that out to bid, if not by the end of the year,
Yeah.
early next year.
Excellent. Yeah, that pre-permitting work is gold.
Yeah.
I mean, that is money that a developer doesn't have to spend. So that's incentive for them to come in and kind of give a
Or
realistic
lets them know
bid.
what they need to spend. So
Sure.
we know
Yeah.
on one of the properties, there's 300 square feet of wetlands
Yeah.
that's in a man-made pit.
Yep.
Doesn't matter, it's wetlands. That needs to become 1,500 square feet
Yep.
at the corner of the property adjacent that connects to existing wetlands.
So they got to recreate.
And
that.
so
Yeah.
there's a cost to that.
Yep.
But if we can specify what that is,
Sure.
working with the
And where
Conservation
it could
Commission,
go,
the
and-
Conservation
right,
Director,
right.
then the developers can put a firm number.
Yeah.
And they don't have to increase their cost to accommodate for risk.
Wow.
And so we're doing that. And it's things you wouldn't expect, such as on one of the properties, we went to the Business One Stop and the fire department's like, well, we actually will need you to add a fire hydrant at least 20 feet off the road
Okay.
onto your property.
Okay.
So, okay, we know that.
Yeah.
We can now build that into
Sure,
the expectations so
sure.
developers don't get
Yeah,
surprised.
no surprise. Right.
and stuff
yeah,
like
no.
that.
No, again, that work is so important, and it creates a collaborative environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it really identifies barriers to entry, so to speak, if you're a developer, or at least gives them a kind of a heads up. So, okay, yes, anything else?
A couple of quick
Yeah,
programs
sure.
we've got going. We talked about the eviction rate and the problem
yeah.
with
Yep.
housing burden. We have 2 programs we're in the process of launching.
Okay.
That will hopefully be, we expect will be up and running in October.
Okay.
The first is the Westboro Rental Assistance Program. This will offer, it's similar to what we did during COVID, with some different options for the types of assistance we can provide.
Okay.
But it's really designed to bridge the gap for people who are struggling to get into the state programs, because it can still take 45 to 60
Yep,
days
okay.
to get through the approval process, but also help provide some housing stability for households that are seeing unusually high rent increases,
Sure.
where they can cover part of that increase but not the full increase. So
Sure,
there's some different
sure,
options there.
okay.
You know, Julia from Westboro Youth and Family Services is actually on our implementation committee with us.
Excellent.
So
Yeah,
she's tied
kinda
in.
connecting that, yep.
And connecting all those dots. The second program is a down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and others, which includes seniors, individuals with disabilities, and veterans,
Mm-hmm.
where if you're someone who's living in an apartment who could afford to buy
Mm-hmm.
at the entry point in the market, but you don't have the full down payment,
Sure.
we can provide up to $30,000 in down payment assistance, and depending on your household income,
Mm-hmm.
that is either what's known as a deferred payment loan,
Mm-hmm.
where there's no interest or payments, but if you ever sell or transfer the property, you pay it back in the
Okay.
future.
Yep.
It can be a deferred payment loan with forgiveness over time. So if you stay in the house long enough, you no longer owe the money back, or a straight out grant to help people get into those properties and over in. And that can lower the down payment requirement for the households
Sure.
as low as 1.5%.
Wow.
And help people who might not quite qualify for affordable housing
Yep.
get into a low end, lower cost market rate home.
Sure.
And
yeah.
so providing for that moderate income as well. And then we're involved in a very strategic long-term planning project. We've partnered with the Westboro Housing Authority.
Right.
They have land behind the current housing on Rogers Road
Mm-hmm.
that's undeveloped. And this is a long-term.
Just for clarification, this is not where the senior center is
This is
today.
not where the senior center
Just
is
for-
now.
yep.
If you drive to the senior center, the hill with the trees
Yep.
On the left.
is
the
the
left,
property.
okay, just for clarity.
It's a challenged property, just proximity to wetlands
Mm-hmm.
and utility capacity, roadway capacity, things of that nature. And so we're looking at it's really a long-term project. This
Sure.
is probably 8 years out before a shovel hits the ground.
Sure.
But we're working with the state, we're working with the housing authority, we're working with some others,
Yep.
so that as things progress, we can act on it and hopefully get some state funding to help with that project.
Well, you guys clearly have a blend of more immediate need type
Yes.
programs. When you mentioned the rental assistance and covering the gap, and certainly much longer detailed
Yeah.
projects, Baylor Ave and the affordable, the Housing Authority,
Yes.
project.
Yes.
So, wow.
And-
Quick shout out to other members of the of your
Absolutely.
committee. Name who are they?
Well,
please?
we have really great committee, I think. So, we have Kate Storm. I'm just trying to think of
Yeah.
one's been on possibly the longest. Kate. She has been very active also with Youth and Family Services and currently undergoing or studying for her master's in social work with University of Southern California.
Yep.
We have Hank Rausch, who is well known throughout town. He had been on the AFC for a number of years, both as chair and
Yep.
as a member. And his background comes, he had been a director, regional or area director for Habitat for Humanity. So he understands a lot of the process
Sure.
of permitting and
Yep.
construction, et cetera. We have Ken Salzman. Ken is a contractor and developer.
Oh, okay.
So if we have a property and, he can come in and
Yeah.
say, is this house worth
Yeah.
rehabbing or what would it cost?
Well, he can talk
Things
the
like that.
language, right?
He
Yeah,
can
yeah.
talk the
Yeah,
language.
yeah.
He can talk the talk, walk the walk. We have Steve Herrera,
Mm-hmm.
who is recent to Westboro, but has some zoning background out of, I think it was Arlington, Belmont area.
Great.
And very, very
He had gone through the first Citizen Leadership Academy.
Yes, that's how he found
and
out.
felt
yeah.
that this was a good way for him to get
Oh, I
involved.
love it. That's awesome.
Which is
Right, and then we have Sarah Rundell, who gone to one of these trade schools in Cambridge called Harvard Law.
Yeah, yeah.
So she's the one we go to when we're, for a variety of things, but it's
course.
also particularly if there's some legal questions,
Yeah.
It's a good way to vet those out.
Yeah.
And
And
she-
what
she's
are the
been-
questions we need to ask, right?
She's,
Yeah.
she's legal counsel with Eastern
Bank.
Okay.
which is
Oh, they're
A big lender.
they're a huge lender
Yes.
in the affordable
Affordable.
housing space as well. So
That's
she's
great.
got connections to individuals who can say, oh, from a bank's perspective
yeah,
on this
yeah.
deal.
Excellent. Excellent.
And can provide
That's great.
resources and advice. And
That's
everyone's actively engaged in different projects.
Yeah, we
and working
form up
groups.
generally working groups,
Yeah,
like three
sure.
person working groups to investigate a particular project
Excellent.
and determine or negotiate or whatever
Yeah.
it needs to be. So it allows us to spread the work out
That's great.
and build a really deep bench.
Yeah. Well, thank you to both of you. Extend the thanks to the committee doing fantastic work. And we'll make sure that our friends at Westboro TV put up contact information as to how
Okay.
they can contact the
Yes, sir.
Affordable Housing Trust with any questions that they have
Absolutely.
around
Yep.
affordability, rental, ownership, or otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank Ed and Alan for being my guests on today's show. I hope you've enjoyed it. Tons of information. This is definitely a show to pause and replay, watch again. But if you have any questions about affordability, at all, please don't hesitate. These guys, as you can see, in the whole committee are here to help and want to make sure that you're able to get your questions answered as it relates to housing. So thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the 01581 Let's Talk. Be well, take care of yourself, and take care of each other.